wants to review its climate law, which aims to tackle a central crisis of our time, global warming. The European Commission has just proposed reducing pollutant emissions by 90% by 2040 compared to 1990 levels in order for the bloc to reach climate neutrality by mid-century. Now, intense negotiations with the European Council and European Parliament are expected. EU Decoded asks how we can reconcile the need for economic growth with the fight against climate change.
The sectors that cause the most greenhouse gas emissions are industry, energy production, transportation, agriculture and housing. The new proposal in the climate law should bridge the gap between the 2030 target to reduce polluting gases by 55% and the aim to achieve net zero pollution by 2050. In other words, by mid-century, emissions from economic activity should not contribute to global warming. This is what was pledged in the 2015 Paris Agreement, which establishes that the planet's average temperature should not exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the levels at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the early 20th century.
Scientific studies show that over the last century, global warming has caused an increase in heat waves, droughts, floods, and loss of biodiversity. But what do EU citizens actually think of this proposed review of the EU's climate law?
L'économie, je ne pense pas que ce soit le plus important dans la vie. Je pense qu'il y a d'autres choses qui sont très importantes, comme l'environnement.
They should invest more in different or in new strategies to reduce the pollution.
Die EU braucht nicht mehr machen, wenn die anderen nichts machen. Schauen Sie nach Amerika, schauen Sie, was dort passiert, schauen Sie nach Indien, schauen Sie nach China und lassen Sie uns in der EU einfach auch wieder die Wirtschaft leben lassen. Wir werden alleine diese Welt nicht retten können.
Fängt bei den Verbrennern an und bei den bei den Verbrennungsanlagen in den Gebäuden, weiterhin Richtung 1,5, was nicht zu halten ist.
We're now joined by Euronews reporter Grégoire Laurie, who covered this announcement. The European Commission is, for the first time, considering allowing government to participate in the international carbon market to offset some of their pollution. But what exactly is being proposed?
So basically, an EU member state could pay a third country outside the EU to reduce its greenhouse emissions. And this effort will be included in the minus 90% in the EU. NGOs are saying it is a nonsense because it runs against scientific opinion. To address this criticism, the Commission is proposing a limited contribution of 3%.
The European Commission is also suggesting that member states could be allowed to use other forms of flexibilities to meet their climate obligations, but this has also been criticised by environmentalists. Can you explain why?
One is the carbon removal, could be nature-based or industrial technologies. And on this point, NGOs are saying that these industrial technologies removers are not developed enough to be scaled up. The other flexibility, in a nutshell, is that flexibility between sectors. So sectors ahead on their reductions could compensate those lagging behind.
To what extent is this decision on the 2040 target linked to the proposals that the EU will have to make at the next UN Climate Summit in November in Brazil, and for the bloc to retain its position as a global leader in this area?
So the EU, as all the parties to the Paris Agreement, have to submit to the UN their updated NDC, nationally determined contribution. These new NDCs will cover Horizon 2035. So if the EU wants to send a clear signal to its international partners that it is committed to multilateralism regarding climate, it has to come up with a strong 2040 target.
85% of Europeans said tackling climate change should be an EU priority, according to a survey released by Eurobarometer in June. 81% of those surveyed by the Statistics Agency support the EU-wide goal of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. 75% believe that reducing fossil fuel imports will increase energy security. To accelerate the process, the Commission proposes tax incentives to encourage investments in clean technologies and more public investment in expanding renewable energy sources.
Our guest is Austrian MEP Lena Schillings from the Greens Group. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
There are now increasingly more climate change skeptics in power, notably in the US, but of course Europe also has its own climate change skeptics. So can the EU maintain its commitment to comply with the Paris Agreement to curb global warming?
It is very hard. I would say in this European Parliament, almost 1/3 of this Parliament are people that deny the climate crisis or say it's not important or whatever. So yes, the majorities have changed. With the US and Trump saying drill, baby, drill, we have a real problem.
A recent bid by the Greens, the Socialists and the Liberals to fast-track the review of the climate law through Parliament was blocked by mostly right-wing parties. Do you think that there is a risk that the negotiations will be bogged down and diluted?
So yes, the far right blocked it together with the EPP. I want to say very clear at this point. And now we, together with the Social Democrats and the Liberals, need to get EPP on board. And that's what we are trying to do, to work together constructively and do another report, other amendments, a whole other story, because we need this climate target, and it's clear with climate denier far right, it's impossible to get it.
Some leaders, notably France's Emmanuel Macron, have already said that they oppose for the moment talks over 2040 targets. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
What Macron is doing here and saying he wants to delay it or whatever, that really messes with the next COP negotiations. And we are always saying we can't solve the climate crisis alone in Europe. We need China, we need the US, we need other countries, we need India. So yes, we need the Council, and yes, we need the Parliament, and in both institutions it's hell of a battle.
The EU's upcoming multi-annual budget for 2028 to 2034 focuses on new priorities, namely economic competitiveness and security and defence. Do you think that funding for the climate transition will be enough to meet the bloc's climate targets?
I have severe doubts. I think there are a few problems with this MFF. The first one is really so much is unclear. There are a lot of things we need. We need money for this clean industrial deal. We need money for biodiversity, as I said. We need money for civil society, but we also need to stop subsidizing and funding climate harming projects or subsidies.
Some say there will be no economy without the planet. On the day he presented his legislative proposal, the European Commissioner for Climate Change cited the example of Slovenia, which lost 11% of its GDP after devastating floods in 2023. Let's see if climate policy remains a priority in a time of economic, security and geopolitical turmoil.